The winds of Nix 9 howled across its frozen surface, carrying ice crystals sharp enough to slice through standard-issue thermal gear. Princess Thera lay half-buried in the snow, her azure skin turning a dangerous shade of pale blue. The biolight patterns that normally danced across her shoulders and face flickered weakly, like stars about to go dark. She tried to move, but her missing legs, cruelly amputated by her stepmother's orders, left her trapped in the endless white. Queen Myra's words still rang in her ears, "A crippled princess is worse than no princess at all. The cold will clean this stain from our bloodline." The transport ship that had dropped her here was long gone, leaving only the endless howl of the wind and the growing numbness in her limbs. Thera's royal training had taught her how to rule a star system, but nothing had prepared her for dying alone on a frozen moon. A sound cut through the wind, the distinctive rumble of sublight engines. At first, Thera thought the cold had started causing hallucinations. But the sound grew louder, and a shadow fell across her face. Through frost-covered lashes, she saw a battered cargo ship descending through the swirling snow. The vessel was nothing like the elegant royal ships of her homeworld. This was a workhorse, patches on its hull, mismatched plates, and signs of multiple repairs. It settled on the ice with a groan of protesting metal, its landing struts leaving deep impressions in the permafrost. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a hatch opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and a figure emerged. Through her dimming vision, Thera saw it was a human, shorter than her people, with skin the color of the system's sun and dark hair whipped by the wind. He wore a patch-covered environment suit that had seen better days. "Hello?" The voice carried across the ice, distorted by the wind and his suit's external speakers. "My sensors picked up life signs. By the stars." He had spotted her. Thera tried to speak, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. The human approached cautiously, his hand near what appeared to be a weapon. Trust came slowly on the frontier worlds. When he reached her, he knelt down, and Thera saw his eyes through his faceplate, a startling shade of gold that reminded her of home. His expression shifted from wariness to concern as he took in her condition. "I'm Raven," he said, probably knowing she couldn't understand him. "And you're nearly frozen. Let's get you somewhere warm." With surprising gentleness, he lifted her from the snow. Thera's remaining body tensed at first. Touch was sacred in her culture, reserved for family and bond mates. But as his warmth seeped through their suits, survival instinct overcame cultural taboo. The interior of his ship was cramped but wonderfully warm. Raven laid her on what appeared to be a medical cot, quickly connecting monitors and starting emergency heating protocols. The ship's AI began rattling off vital signs in a language Thera didn't understand. "Your core temperature is dangerously low," Raven said, though she couldn't understand the words. His tone was gentle but efficient as he worked. "But we'll fix that. I've seen enough weird things out here to know sometimes the universe drops problems in your lap for a reason." As warmth slowly returned to her body, Thera studied her unlikely savior. He moved with the confidence of someone used to handling emergencies alone, but there was kindness in how carefully he checked her vital signs. His ship might be a patchwork, but his medical equipment was surprisingly sophisticated. Her royal tutors had taught her that humans were a crude, primitive species, barely worth diplomatic consideration. Yet here was one who had saved her without hesitation, asking nothing in return. Perhaps there was much her people had to learn. As her consciousness began to fade, Thera managed to whisper her name in her native tongue. Raven paused in his work, looking at her with those striking golden eyes. "Thera," he repeated carefully, then gave her a slight smile. "Well, Thera, I don't know your story yet, but you're safe now. Rest." She drifted into healing sleep as the ship's engines rumbled to life, carrying her away from what was supposed to be her tomb. Her last thought was that perhaps losing everything had led her to exactly where she needed to be. What neither of them knew was that this chance encounter would spark a chain of events that would shake the foundations of two civilizations and rewrite the future of an entire sector of space. But for now, in the warm safety of a battered cargo ship rising through the clouds of Nix, 9, that future could wait. The first week aboard the stellar drift was a blur of fever dreams for Thera. She drifted between consciousness and memories, her mind replaying the moment when guards dragged her from her chambers in the dead of night. Sometimes she would wake screaming, her biolights flashing in distress, only to find Raven there with a calm voice and steady hands. He had converted his cargo hold into a makeshift medical bay, trading valuable goods for the specialized equipment her alien physiology required. The ship's AI, which he called Nova, helped translate his basic medical questions into approximations of her language. "Your fever's finally breaking," Raven said one morning, checking the medical readouts. Through their fumbling attempts at communication, she had begun to understand simple phrases. "But we need to keep moving. Your stepmother's people have been asking questions at the last 3 ports." Thera pushed herself up on her elbows, her strength slowly returning. The steady thrum of the ship's engines had become oddly comforting, as had Raven's presence. He moved around her with careful respect, never treating her as less for her disability, never showing disgust at her alien features. "Why help?" she asked in halting standard English, the trade language he'd been teaching her. "Dangerous for you." Raven paused in his work, considering her question. His golden eyes, so strange yet beautiful on a human, held a mix of emotions she was learning to read. "Because it was right," he said simply. "And because I know something about being cast aside by family." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing an intricate tattoo that she now knew marked him as ex-military. "Fleet family for 15 years. Then I questioned some orders that would have killed civilians. Suddenly I wasn't family anymore." His smile was wry. "Sometimes the people who should love us are the ones who hurt us most." Nova's warning chime interrupted them. "Unregistered scan detected," the AI reported. "Pattern matches Royal Enforcement vessels." Raven swore colorfully, teaching Thera several new words in the process. "They're casting a wider net than I thought." He moved to the pilot's chair, his hands dancing over the controls. "Nova, start the countermeasures we discussed. Thera, hold on to something." The ship banked hard, acceleration pressing Thera into her medical bed. Through the viewport, she watched as Raven guided them into a dense asteroid field. It was reckless, possibly suicidal, but she was learning that humans had a different definition of impossible than her people. "Your stepmother really wants you dead," Raven commented as he threaded between 2 massive rocks. "Want to tell me why?" Thera closed her eyes, gathering both courage and vocabulary. "My father, King. He died strange. Fast sickness. Then she gestured to her missing legs. Say broken princess shame family. But I think she kill him." The ship shuddered as debris from a pulverized asteroid peppered the hull. Raven's expression hardened. "So she murdered your father, mutilated you, and left you to die because you might have figured it out." His hands tightened on the controls. "That's not going to stand." "Not your fight," Thera protested, though something warm bloomed in her chest at his anger on her behalf. "Maybe not," he agreed, executing another impossible turn. "But I'm making it mine. Nova, set course for the shadow markets on Lyra Station. We need some specialized equipment." Thera knew of Lyra Station, a haven for outlaws and revolutionaries, where species mingled freely and credits bought anything. Dangerous place. Raven's grin was fierce and beautiful. "Exactly. Your stepmother's people won't follow us there. And we need to get you mobile again." He glanced back at her. "Unless you object to human cybernetics?" The suggestion shocked her. Among her people, cybernetic enhancement was considered a desecration of the natural form. But then, her people had also left her to die. Perhaps it was time to embrace new ways. "Trust you," she said simply, and was rewarded with a smile that lit up his entire face. Hours later, when they were safely hidden in the dust clouds of the Carina Nebula, Raven taught her to play a human game called chess. As she learned to think in new patterns, to see new possibilities, Thera realized she was learning far more than just strategy. She was learning that sometimes you had to break tradition to become whole. That strength could be found in the most unexpected places. And that perhaps the universe had a strange wisdom in bringing together two broken people who could help each other heal. As her biolights pulsed in sync with the ship's gentle hum, Thera watched Raven explain the movement of each piece, his hands animated and his eyes bright with enthusiasm. She thought of her father's teachings about the importance of maintaining pure bloodlines and ancient traditions. Looking at this human who had risked everything to save her, she wondered if perhaps the greatest wisdom was in knowing which traditions to keep, and which to leave behind in the frost of dead moons. Lyra Station hung in the void like a tarnished jewel, its sprawling rings rotating in an eternal dance. The stellar drift approached through a cloud of mining debris, one of countless ships seeking anonymity in the lawless port. Inside, Thera watched with fascination as Raven attached the final calibration sensors to her new prosthetic legs. "Human tech isn't as elegant as your people's," he admitted, making a final adjustment. "But what we lack in beauty, we make up for in adaptability." The cybernetic limbs gleamed dull silver, their joints humming with potential energy. "Ready to try standing?" Thera took a deep breath, her biolights flickering with anticipation. The neural interface tingled as it synchronized with her nervous system, strange, but not unpleasant. With Raven's hands providing steady support, she pushed herself upright. The sensation was overwhelming. After months of helplessness, she was vertical again. The prosthetics responded to her thoughts smoothly, if not quite as naturally as her original legs. Tears welled in her eyes as she took her first wobbling step. "I walk," she whispered in her increasingly fluent English. "Raven, I walk." His answering smile was brilliant, but quickly turned to alarm as she lost her balance. He caught her before she could fall, and suddenly they were very close, her biolights casting a soft blue glow across his features. For a moment, neither moved. Then Nova's voice broke the spell. "Incoming transmission, encrypted channel. Origin, Palace Security Archives." Raven helped Thera to a seat before accepting the transmission. A hooded figure appeared on the screen, one of their growing network of allies within the palace. "The data you requested," the figure said without preamble. "Medical records for the late king's final days. Be careful, I've already lost 2 friends asking questions about this." The transmission ended as abruptly as it began. Raven transferred the files to a secure tablet and handed it to Thera. Her hands trembled as she read, her natural facility with data analysis finding patterns in the medical logs. "These treatments," she said slowly, "they're wrong. Father wasn't sick, he was poisoned. Gradually, with something that mimicked natural illness." Her biolights pulsed with anger. "And the doctor who signed these reports disappeared right after Mira took power." Raven leaned over her shoulder, studying the data. Classic pattern. Remove the witnesses, control the narrative. His hand rested supportively on her shoulder. "But murderers always make mistakes. We just have to find them." Over the next few days, as Thera grew stronger with her new legs, they dug deeper into the conspiracy. Raven's underworld contacts provided pieces of a larger puzzle, unusual financial transactions, mysterious disappearances, weapons stockpiled in secret locations. They worked in comfortable synchronization, her royal education complementing his street wisdom. During breaks, he taught her human card games and she taught him the sacred dances of her people, modified for his human limbs. Their laughter echoed through the ship's corridors, defying the darkness they were uncovering. One evening, after a particularly frustrating dead end, Thera found Raven in the observation dome, staring at the stars. She moved to stand beside him, her prosthetic legs now nearly silent. "Tell me about Earth," she said softly. "Your homeworld." He was quiet for a long moment. "It's beautiful," he finally said. "Oceans deeper than space, mountains that pierce the clouds, forests older than both our civilizations combined." His voice held a longing that resonated with her own exile. "Haven't been back in years. Made some choices the authorities there wouldn't appreciate." "You are, what is word? Revolutionary?" His laugh was soft. "More like a disillusioned idealist. Thought I could change things from within the system. Learned the hard way that sometimes you have to work outside it." He turned to face her. "What about you? Still want your crown back?" Thera considered the question carefully. "Want justice," she said finally. "Want truth. Crown means nothing if system stays corrupt. Now who's the revolutionary?" His golden eyes held approval and something warmer. "Speaking of which, I have a lead on your stepmother's private communication channels. Want to do some extremely illegal monitoring?" They spent hours sifting through encrypted transmissions, shoulders touching as they worked. The contact was dangerous but comforting, like everything about their growing relationship. Boundaries between alien and human, princess and outlaw, seemed to matter less with each passing day. Near Station Midnight, they found it, proof that Mira had been planning the king's death for years. Recordings, financial trails, even the formula for the poison she'd used. Thera's biolights flared with vindication and rage. "We have her," she breathed. "Finally have proof." "Yes," Raven agreed, but his expression was troubled. "And now comes the dangerous part. Because proof isn't enough, we need a way to expose her that she can't cover up or dismiss. And that means going back to your homeworld." Thera's biolights dimmed at the thought, but she squared her shoulders. "Then we go. Together?" Raven's hand found hers, warm and sure. "Together," he confirmed. "After all, I've always wanted to crash a royal party." Their eyes met, and in that moment both knew they'd passed a point of no return. Whatever came next would change everything, for them, for her people, perhaps for the relationship between their species. But as Thera looked at this human who had become so much more than a rescuer, she couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, witnesses to a conspiracy of hope being born in the shadows of Lyra Station. Tomorrow they would begin planning their return to the heart of power. But for now, they simply existed in comfortable silence, two outcasts who had found something unexpected in the vast darkness of space, a chance to right ancient wrongs, and perhaps, something even more precious. The grand halls of House Ven's secret sanctuary buzzed with activity. Located in an abandoned mining facility deep within an asteroid belt, it had become a gathering point for those who remembered King Ven's true legacy. Thera stood before a holographic map of the palace, her prosthetic legs now moving with practiced grace as she outlined their plan to the assembled rebels. "The Festival of Ascending Light," she explained, her English now fluid enough to address the mixed crowd of her people and human allies. "It's the only time each year when the palace shields must be lowered for the traditional ceremony. Our one chance to enter undetected." Among the gathered faces, she saw hope warring with fear. Many were former palace guards and servants who had fled Myra's purges. Others were merchants and traders who had witnessed the queen's growing tyranny. In the back, a contingent of human mercenaries, former comrades of Raven's, studied the tactical displays with professional interest. Raven stepped forward, his presence at her side as natural as breathing. "We've confirmed that Queen Mira plans to use the festival to announce a new trade agreement with the consortium. She's selling mining rights to sacred territories, rights that will displace thousands of your people." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Thera's former handmaiden, Selith, spoke up. "The common people already whisper against her, but they fear her royal guard. How can we ensure they'll support us? With truth, Thera said firmly, her biolights pulsing with conviction. She activated another hologram, the compiled evidence of Myra's crimes. We'll broadcast this to every communication device in the capital. But first, we need to get our people into position. As the meeting broke into smaller planning groups, Raven pulled Thera aside to a quiet corridor. His expression was serious. The human mercenaries want double their usual rate. Say the risk of going against royal tech is too high. Thera smiled, reaching into a hidden compartment in her prosthetic leg. She withdrew a small crystal, a royal jewel she'd managed to conceal during her exile. Then we pay them. My father taught me to always keep something in reserve for desperate times. Raven's eyes widened at the gem's value, then narrowed with concern. That could fund your entire new life somewhere safe. Are you sure you want to risk everything on this? My life isn't worth living if I abandon my people to her rule. Thera stepped closer, her biolights softly illuminating the space between them. Besides, I've found something worth more than safety. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing one of her luminescent markings. Your people may not accept this, accept us. Even if we win. Then they'll learn to evolve, as I have. She leaned into his touch. You taught me that tradition without compassion is just another form of cruelty. Their moment was interrupted by Nova's alert. Incoming transmission from Palace Contact. Urgent. They rushed to the command center. Their inside source's face was strained. The Queen knows something's coming. She's moved up the festival by 3 days and doubled the guard. Worse, she's brought in consortium peacekeepers. Raven swore colorfully. Consortium means energy shields our jammers can't penetrate. We'll need a new approach. But Thera was already thinking, her tactical training combining with what she'd learned of human improvisation. No, she said slowly, this is good. The consortium values profit above all else. And I know something they'd value more than Myra's promises. She quickly outlined her new plan. Raven's eyes lit up with understanding and admiration. You're going to outbid her, with the mining rights to your own sacred lands? No, Thera's smile was fierce. I'm going to offer them something better, exclusive rights to new human-designed cybernetics, compatible with every known species. The technology that gave me back my legs. She gestured to their gathered allies. Our two peoples working together, not exploiting each other. The next hours were a blur of preparation. Human technicians worked alongside royal engineers, modifying weapons to penetrate palace defenses. Former palace servants mapped guard rotations and secret passages. Raven's mercenary contacts arranged diversions and escape routes. Through it all, Thera felt a growing sense of rightness. This was what her father had dreamed of, different species working together, learning from each other's strengths. She watched Raven moving among both groups with easy authority, bridging cultural gaps with intuitive diplomacy. Late that night, unable to sleep, she found him in the ship's small galley. He was studying old palace schematics, but looked up at her approach. Without words, he held out a cup of the bitter human drink he called coffee. She accepted it, their fingers brushing. Having second thoughts, he asked softly. No. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching. Thinking about father. He used to say change only comes when someone is brave enough to imagine a different future. Wise man. Raven's hand found hers. You know, when I found you on that moon, I thought I was just saving one life. Never imagined I'd end up part of a revolution. Regret it? His answer was to pull her closer, pressing his forehead to hers in the traditional greeting of her people. Never. Whatever happens tomorrow, this is where I'm meant to be. They stayed like that for a long moment, their breathing synchronizing. Outside, final preparations continued for the battle to come. But here in this quiet space, a princess and a smuggler held on to something precious and new, a future neither of them had imagined possible, born from the ashes of everything they'd lost. The festival of ascending light transformed the royal palace into a kaleidoscope of color and shadow. Ceremonial light crystals floated in anti-gravity fields, their radiance reflecting off the gathered aristocracy's ornate clothing. Queen Mira stood on the grand balcony, resplendent in traditional robes, addressing the crowd below. "Today marks a new era of prosperity," she proclaimed, her voice carrying across the grand plaza. "Our alliance with the consortium will ensure our people's future." Her words cut off as the light crystals suddenly shifted color, bathing the scene in azure blue, the shade of Thura's biolights. Every communication device in the capital activated simultaneously, projecting a single image: King Ven in his final days, his deterioration documented in damning detail. Thura's voice, strong and clear, filled the air. "People of the stellar crown, you were told your king died of natural causes. This was a lie." Security forces scrambled as hidden transmitters activated throughout the palace. Evidence flooded every channel: financial records, witness testimonies, the poison formula matched to traces found in the king's preserved tissues. But most damning was the security recording of Mira herself, speaking to her conspirators about the regrettable necessity of removing both father and daughter. In the ensuing chaos, few noticed the small group of figures emerging from hidden passages. Thura, her prosthetic legs allowing her to move silently, led the way. Raven flanked her, along with a mix of human mercenaries and loyal palace guards. They had practiced this formation countless times, but now everything was real. Queen Myra's face contorted with rage as she recognized the transmission source. "Seize the traitors," she commanded her royal guard. "Kill the alien princess and her human dogs." But as her guards moved to obey, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down." The consortium ambassador stepped forward, his crystalline form refracting the light. "Our contract is void. The evidence of regicide invalidates all agreements." "You dare?" Mira snarled. "I am your queen." "No." Thura emerged onto the balcony, her biolights pulsing with authority. "You are a murderer who stole my father's throne." She addressed the crowd directly. "I come not just for justice, but with a vision of our future. Look at these legs that let me walk again, human technology, adapted to our biology. This is what we can achieve through true cooperation, not exploitation." The royal guard hesitated, looking between the two queens. In that moment of uncertainty, Raven's mercenaries disabled the palace's remaining security systems. Loyal servants opened doors for the rebels who had waited in secret. The balance of power shifted like sand in a solar wind. Mira, seeing her support crumbling, drew a hidden weapon. "You're still the same weak, flawed thing," she spat at Thura. "No amount of alien technology can change that." "My father taught me that true strength lies in wisdom," Thura replied calmly. "In knowing when to hold to tradition, and when to embrace change." Her hand found Raven's beside her. "In seeing value in those different from ourselves." The queen fired, but Thura was already moving, her prosthetic legs giving her speed and agility she'd never had before. The energy blast scorched the wall behind her as Raven's return shot knocked the weapon from Myra's hand. In moments, it was over. Royal guards who had served under King Ven moved to secure the queen. The consortium ambassador, seeing which way the solar winds blew, immediately opened negotiations with Thura for her proposed technology-sharing initiative. As palace officials began restoring order, Thura turned to address her people properly. Her voice carried the authority of her bloodline, tempered by the wisdom of her exile. "My father dreamed of a kingdom that could grow beyond its ancient boundaries," she declared. "Where tradition and progress could coexist. Where we could learn from other species instead of fearing them." She squeezed Raven's hand. "I stand before you changed, not weakened, but strengthened by my experiences. By the human who saw value in a broken princess and taught me that differences can be bridges instead of barriers. The crowd's response was uncertain at first, then growing in strength, not just acceptance, but hope. They had seen their society stagnating under Myra's rigid rule. Here was a chance for something new. Hours later, after the initial chaos had settled and provisional authorities were in place, Thera found a quiet moment with Raven in the palace gardens. The light crystals had returned to their normal color, bathing them in soft radiance. "So," he said, a hint of his old roguish smile returning. "Your Majesty. Does this mean I have to start bowing and scraping?" She laughed, the sound bright and free. "I was thinking of creating a new position, Royal Ambassador to Earth. Someone who understands both our peoples." Her biolights pulsed with affection. "Know anyone qualified? Might have some suggestions." He drew her close. "Though I hope the position includes some personal time with the Queen. I think that can be arranged." She touched her forehead to his in the traditional gesture, then surprised him by adding a human kiss. After all, some traditions are worth breaking. Above them, the eternal stars wheeled in their courses, unchanged by the day's events. But on the planet below, something new had begun, a convergence of species and cultures that would ripple across the galaxy. It had started with an act of compassion on a frozen moon, proof that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with armies or weapons, but with a simple choice to see value in those different from ourselves. And in the royal gardens, a human and his alien queen began writing the next chapter of their story together, no longer outcasts, but pioneers of a future neither of them could have imagined alone.